A good Erev Shabbos. Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. Ukrasem dror ba'aretz l'chol yosheveha. This might be the best known verse or fragment of a verse from this week's Parsha, Behar. It certainly is the best publicized. It appears billions of times on American coins, bills, and stamps, wherever the Liberty Bell is pictured. In our Parsha conversation this week, our astute host, Tony, noted that the Liberty Bell originally had nothing to do with the colony's independence from Britain. Rather, the bell was commissioned in 1751 to celebrate the Jubilee, the Yovel, the 50th anniversary of William Penn's Charter of Privileges, sort of Pennsylvania's first constitution. The bell later became a symbol of the nation's freedom, and still later with the movement to abolish slavery in the United States. When we speak about liberty, are we talking about simply the absence of constraints, or do we mean something else? The empowerment of a person, the access to resources to act on that free will. And what exactly does any of that mean for a believing Jew? These are good questions to ask, particularly in our times, as we see, after many years of increasing liberty and opportunity, some of those liberties may be under assault and even in retreat. The great 20th century philosopher Isaiah Berlin formulated this question in an essay which he delivered as a speech at Oxford some 60 years ago called Two Concepts of Liberty. Berlin calls these negative liberty and positive liberty. Negative liberty is the absence of constraints or disciplines that restrict a person's behavior. This is non-interference by the state or any other ruling body which would limit what a person can do. Positive liberty is not only an absence of restraints, it's the ability, the empowerment to act upon these choices. It means you actually have the wherewithal to do as you choose. That's a bit of a tall order, wouldn't you say? While all of us who hold a valid passport, which is no small thing to get, you have to have a few documents in order, which is a challenge for many people. Once you have your passport, not everyone who has a passport has the positive liberty, in this case the time and the money, to take all those trips abroad that they might like. So the economic situation may impose some constraints on the positive liberty. Rabbi Sachs presented these two concepts in a talk which is found on his website under the title A New Concept of Freedom, which is worth your time listening to. Rabbi Sachs brings these ideas under the general headings in Hebrew of chofshi and cherut. Chofesh, you remember from summer camp or maybe from Israel. Zman chofesh means your free time. You can do whatever you like. No structure, no obligations. You just choose your own adventure. Or don't. There's no obligation, really. The other word for freedom, cherut, is freedom to self-actualize, freedom to pursue your loftiest, highest goals, your ultimate state of being. It's not simply that idea that no one can tell you what you can or can't do. Rather, no one is stopping you from becoming all that you can possibly be. The thing is, you've got to take responsibility for that development. That may well be why this term is chosen in the Mishnah by the sages who teach that Ein lecha ben chorin el mi she'osek b'talmud Torah. No one, except the one who engages in the study of Torah, can truly be called free, says the Mishnah. How can that possibly be? How can we say that adherence to Torah and engagement in its study is true freedom? In fact, I can think of many Jews who would disagree with that statement. Maybe you know some of them too. Because Torah is not all necessarily about your freedoms. Rather, in large part, it's about your responsibilities, your obligations, moment to moment, daily, weekly, annually, over your lifetime, over the lifetime of the nation, stretching back thousands of years into the past and extending forward forever. It seems that freedom does not come unencumbered. There is no free lunch. In order to be links in the chain of the nation that embodies freedom, the Jewish people, even in times when our bodies have actually been enslaved and imprisoned, we have to maintain our inner positive liberty, to see ourselves as a people in whose way nothing can stand to block us from being the very fullest and best Jews that we can. In earlier times, this meant slavery, persecution, harassment, and even extermination. History will show that none of that stopped us from being and living as Jews even in the worst circumstances. Perhaps today's challenge, at least as it has been for the last decades, is the best of times, is negative liberty. We become very comfortable and even expecting, anticipating, looking forward to that negative liberty. We chafed at anyone who tried to impose thou shalt or thou shalt nots on us, to the point where we sometimes lost track of where it was that we would be willing to pledge our loyalty. In other words, the post-war era of increasing democracy and more open societies, freer, easier travel and flow of information, and better economic well-being has left us much more chofshi, free to choose whatever we like or nothing at all. And we know that so many have chosen that, just that, nothing at all. That mistakes chofshi for cherut in Sachs's terminology, or negative liberty for positive liberty in Isaiah Berlin's. It's not just the absence of compulsion that should be our goal, what we seek. It's rather the opportunity to be our best selves, achieve the most we can, truly to be all that we can be. And there we come back to Ein Ben Chorin. No one can be said to be truly free, Ella, except for Misha Osek B'Talmud Torah, the one who learns Torah. In fact, our parsha this week, Behar, is in the very sense a cautionary tale about this very point. First, it says we should appreciate the gift of the land of Israel by working it appropriately, which means giving it a rest, letting it lie fallow, giving it a Shabbat once every 7 years. The term Shabbat is what's used, rest, just like we need a rest once every 7 days. We're supposed to observe that sabbatical of the land, and also a jubilee every 50 years. And we're supposed to practice honesty in business, not to aggrieve one another with unfair practice of commerce, and we're supposed to prevent poverty in a proactive fashion by helping those around us who may be in need. We should lend neither money nor sustenance at interest, but rather do so interest-free. In the case of a Hebrew indentured servant, we're supposed to treat him with kindness, redeem him, release him from his bond in good time, and with severance bonuses. And lastly, a mitzvah not to worship idols or facilitate their use. It's a cautionary tale because the mitzvahs are, in a sense, in a sequence of what could happen. One thing leads to another. If we fail to respect the land and the beautiful inheritance of having our own homeland, and fail to give it the care that it needs, namely a sabbatical, we will ultimately wind up harming one another in business. That will lead to an over-reliance on credit and debt and deficit spending, with interest that becomes more onerous than the original loan. There may come a point where some of us, or even many of us, enter a kind of indentured servitude to support our materialism. And finally, the Parsha cautions we may even find ourselves sold not only into servitude to one another, but even into serving foreign gods, heaven forbid. This is really a warning about what can go wrong if we allow a just and balanced society to slip away. That's why we're so careful, wherever we have lived, to set up charitable funds, free loans, hachnasas kala for poor brides, mutual aid societies, chevra kadisha, and so forth. This comprehensive and complete vision of what a well-functioning society can look like really lives up to, in some ways, to Isaiah Berlin's idea of positive liberty, of which even he himself was a little bit skeptical. The resources and autonomy for people to make the best and most positive and beneficial and healthy choices to have their best life for themselves, for their families, for their community. We've been reading all this year since Rosh Hashanah in our shul a book called No Better Home, with a question mark, Jews, Canada, and the Sense of Belonging, which examines the extent to which here in Canada over the last 7 decades or so, Canada has blossomed into the freest, most supportive, most hospitable, and economically viable society in which Jews have ever lived. At least so goes the argument of the compiler of this volume, a professor at York University, who hopefully will speak to us at some point in the coming weeks. As America takes a step backwards away from liberty, restricting the ability of its citizens to exercise personal autonomy in its failure to provide basic protection from many of life's unexpected or even expected vicissitudes, perhaps it is turning out in our neighbor to the south not to be the golden Medina it was or was thought to be for a century of Jewry's golden age there. Without being too pessimistic, let's remember that unfortunate things can happen to us anywhere, even here. If history is any guide, unfortunate things will happen. The wise thing for us is to amass wealth in the most portable currency there is: knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. What is in our heads and in our hearts can never be taken away from us. So let's continue to invest deeply in those futures, which, if we manage our portfolio correctly, leads to invaluable returns of kindness, wisdom, generosity, and mutual support and care among our people for one another, no matter what the circumstances. Then we'll continue to learn the lessons and reap the benefits, not of being chofshi, but of true cherut, the emes of freedom, of engagement with the ultimate truths of God's Torah. Shabbat Shalom.